everyone, thank you for stopping by my channel today. If you've been here before, welcome back. It's nice to see you. If this is your first time, my name is Gina, and my intent with my channel, from the very beginning actually, has always been the idea that there's more to life than looking good, but you've got to look good too. My passion rests in the idea and the belief that we as people are a complete package. And so not only do we want to look good and everything that involves, but we also need to feel good because those two things are 100% related. And so today I'm going to give you one of those look good videos. Thank you so much for the feedback where you guys gave me some insight into some of the videos and some of the things you wanted me to talk about. I had mentioned that I had gotten a hold of the Hourglass Veil Translucent Loose Powder. And so by the end of this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare it to a couple other high-end powders because they are not all exactly the same and interchangeable. And so hopefully by the end of the video, you'll have a little insight into which one you might prefer. Although if you want to get all of them, why the heck not? Because I'm sitting here with all three of them that I'm going to be talking about today. And so why don't we be friends? And you also have three at the end of the day too. Anyway, so let me get started. I'm going to compare the two that I'm primarily going to compare them to are the Becca hydra-mist Set and Refresh powder, and then the classic oldie but goodie, the Laura Mercier translucent loose setting powder. The Becca is a new release. The Laura Mercier has been out for a very long time, popular all over YouTube. And so, yeah, let's kind of talk into the comparison of them, and then I'll give you my insight specifically into the Hourglass Veil. I did do a video on the Becca hydra-mist. Definitely check that out. I will link that. Also, I have probably highlighted the Laura Mercier translucent loose setting powder in a number of videos over the last couple of years. And so I've got more information and more knowledge, and I've got a different take on everything. So let's start. I've got notes, so only because they involve numbers, and so I'm going to refer to them. Let's talk about pricing. Starting with the Hourglass Veil, this is only like 1/3 of an ounce, 0.36, and it is the most expensive at $46. So you get like hardly anything for like the most amount of money. By comparison, similarly speaking, the Becca hydra-mist is also about 1/3 of an ounce. It's literally 0.35 of an ounce, but it is only $38. So it's about $8 less than the Hourglass. Going back to the classic, the Laura Mercier powder is a full ounce. And you can tell the jar is much larger as well. It is a full ounce, yet it is the same price as the Becca. It is only $38, yet it is 3 times the size of that. So when it comes to money, your best bet is definitely the Laura Mercier. The worst one is the Hourglass Veil. Let me talk about packaging now for a minute. Okay, so the Laura Mercier one is frustrating because it's the classic loose powder container. It's got the little poke holes in the top, and so once the powder comes out, it's difficult to get it to go back in. It's a very wide surface area, so if too much powder winds up coming out, your brush might tend to pick up a little bit more powder than you would like. I think it's the messiest one, and I'm not a fan of it. I've joked in so many of my videos that loose powder and I do not get along. I wind up wearing it everywhere, and I'm typically wearing like black pants, and so that's like my poker tell. It's like, hi, did you put loose powder on today? Oh yeah, hey, because your pants are dusted with powder. So out of the 3 of them, I definitely like the Laura Mercier the least. When it comes to the Hourglass Veil powder, this is interesting. So it's as if they heard all of us talking and they were like, okay, we need to make the packaging a little bit friendlier. So it comes in a little bit of what looks like a dish, which is kind of nice. I don't know if you can see. It looks like a mini little bowl, which is great because now you've got someplace, a wide surface area where you can put your brush, but the holes are only in the center. In fact, you can see it. I've flipped this upside down a couple of times. And so where that little white, looks like a piece of candy, like there's like a white center to it, that is the only place that there are holes. And so it restricts and limits the amount of powder that comes out. You can also see in the cap, see how it's white in the center? That's where your powder goes also. So this is kind of interesting. It's like powder dispenser regulation. And what's fun is that the holes are in the letter H, which you can't really see once there's powder all over the place, but that was creative nonetheless. So the way that you would do it, let me grab my powder brush, hold on. The way that you would do it is you have two ways. The reason mine looks so overly powdery right now is because this guy had gone upside down. I was getting set up and taking my thumbnail shot, and I dropped all of the powders. They all like slid all over themselves. And so what you would then typically do at that point is you could tap it and get the powder to kind of go back down. That made a little bit of a mess. See, it's a little frustrating. This is why I don't get along with loose powder. But this is actually a nice design because there aren't holes all over the entire dish. So you could favor an edge around, you could favor your brush around the edge of the bowl so you could get a little bit less powder, which is very nice. So because I have so much powder in there, I would typically just dip in there and then kind of tap off. If you're starting with zero powder in there, meaning you weren't a klutz like me, it didn't fall all over the place and bounce around, and you had minimal powder in there, you could this is going to be a mess. You could technically take your brush, place it entirely over the hole, and shake upside. Oh, that worked out pretty nice. There's not powder snowing everywhere. You could shake upside down and get a very small amount of loose powder on the brush. And so I'm definitely, okay, I need to stop. I'm definitely a fan of the packaging. I like the intent behind it, but I feel like it is a little bit, I'm so sorry. Live TV, folks. Well, it's not really live, but it's live right now. But it is a little bit frustrating because there's the governor. Although that's what we've been complaining that we needed, or that I needed, and now the governor is a little too governing. So I don't know. That being said, my favorite packaging of all of them is definitely the Becca hydra-mist. Let me get rid of the mirror and take off the top. What's great about it, it's got a little cover, so you could, when you unscrew it, like powder doesn't like fly everywhere. But what's so great is when you pull the cap up, the little hat, there is a net. And the net is the entire surface of the container. And so the powder can sink back into the container very easily, but you can also get a wide surface area on top of your brush. Now, in my review, I need to hurry up and close this because in my review, the cooling effect of this powder does not last when it is exposed to the air. Definitely check out that video. First of all, I'm sorry, I just have to say my reaction was hilarious because it is the craziest sensation, but I'll talk about that in a second. So that's kind of my summary on the packaging. My least favorite is Laura. My favorite is Becca. And the Hourglass is like, if it was like 1 to 10 and Laura Mercier was like a 10, no, Laura Mercier was like, let's say an 8, with number 1 being the best. Becca would be number 1. Hourglass would be like 2 or 3 because it's up there, but there's a little bit of character flaw in it. Okay, so let me talk about the difference between the powders. What I learned when it comes to loose powders. Now, I have historically always had oily skin. I have now kind of converted to combination skin. I guess at the end of the day, we never want to look pasty and we never want to look flat. We want to have something of dimension to our face. We kind of want to look alive. Well, historically, when it came to oily skin, I added my own inner luminescence that would come out my pores. And so I was always focusing on powders that were mattifying. That has now since changed, as I'm sure it has for many of you, especially as you begin to age. The assumption or the prediction is that your skin will dry out. So if you even start with dry skin, then you're really in trouble. So here's what I've learned about powders. There are many ingredients that go into all the powders. And so what I'm talking about isn't 100% absolute. But the main deal and the main difference is that powders are predominantly made of talc or they are predominantly made of mica. Talc in and of itself is a mattifier. It is an oil absorber. And it is, let's say, for all intents and purposes, non-reflective. That is its intent. It is meant to just kind of set you and not add any luminosity, not any reflection. It's just meant to literally mattify you. And if you're not careful, you can tend to look a little bit pasty, especially when you consider the condition and the origin of your own skin. Mica, on the other hand, is meant to be reflective. And the more mica in a particular product, the more reflective that it is. And so it's been interesting to me because let me start here. The Laura Mercier powder is predominantly talc. And this is why, even though I have oily skin, I always had trouble setting my under eye concealer with it. And many other people on YouTube do so, and as do the viewers when they comment about, oh my God, I love the Laura Mercier. And I would give myself added texture underneath my eyes. My under eyes were not oily, ironically, even though the rest of my face was. And so the reason for that is because the Laura Mercier Translucent Loose Setting Powder is predominantly talc. And so I realized this could potentially give you a little bit of a pasty, flat, matte effect if you weren't careful. And this is why I've now shied away from ever setting my under eyes. It sets your concealer great because it kind of mattifies and keeps it in place, but it almost does too much of a good job, and it doesn't wind up giving you just kind of a healthy reflection under there, at least for me. Now, back to the highlight of the show. The Hourglass Veil Powder is predominantly mica, which means that it's got like a very slight luminosity to it. I don't even want to say that, because it's not that way. You know how Hourglass has the ambient lighting powders, and those are meant to add dimension and a freshness to your face. The Hourglass Veil is like a step below that. So it's got the mica in it, so it's not 100% matte, but it's got let me rephrase. It's got the mica in it, and so therefore it does not give you a matte complexion. Is it shiny and reflective? Is it resembling like a highlighter? Not in any way. So this is like non-matte. Does that make sense? Yes, this is like a non-matte powder, which is great, especially if you do have oily skin, but then it also works out very nicely if you have dry or combination skin. So when it comes to skin types, I feel like the Hourglass Veil works well for all of them because it does have that mica in it, but it doesn't have like a ton of, like I said, luminosity or reflection. For example, by comparison, by IT Cosmetics, this is that Celebration Foundation Illumination Pressed Powder Foundation. This also is predominantly mica, and this will get you a reflection. Oh my goodness. Well, for me anyway, because I've only got combination skin. But this as well has mica, and that's why, or predominantly mica, which is why it calls itself an illumination powder because it's meant to reflect. Just as a heads up, by comparison, the RCMA Translucent Loose Powder, and I don't even want to say predominantly because it doesn't have any mica in it. This is talc. Also, the Coty Airspun variety of powders, also talc. And so they tend to give, like I said, what would be a much more matte reflection and complexion. And so if you're starting off with dry or even combination skin, you got to be careful. Okay, let me just comment then on the composition of the Becca powder. Now I love the Becca powder. The Becca powder is mica. It's one of the first ingredients, but also it's got water in it. And so not only does it hydrate the skin so that I believe it hydrates. How could it not if it's got water in it? I don't know the science behind it, but it definitely does not dry out my face. And so it gives you kind of that added little touch of moisture, but then also with the mica, it is not a 100% matte look as well. So where do I stand? I feel like the Hourglass Veil works for all skin types. But of course, obviously there's variations within that, so you've got to be careful. Laura Mercier wants to be a little bit drying, so you got to be very careful. Maybe you could use it to set your face, but maybe not your under eye. All I know is that we've been talking for many years about using it to set our under eye concealer, and I think, of course, it's not 100%, but I think you have to be wary of that. How about that? And then the Becca's moisturizing, and it gives you a little bit of a healthy glow, which I absolutely love. So I'm kind of tied between these two. On my oilier days, I want to use this one. Like if I feel like for whatever my skin is acting up, if I'm having like a normal day, I like the Hourglass Veil. I honestly have not picked up the Laura Mercier Translucent Loose Setting Powder in quite some time. So what's my conclusion? Well, I think that the Hourglass Veil and the Becca are very similar. And as such, the Hourglass veil is so much more expensive. Now, the Becca has that character flaw that I was talking about where it doesn't give you that cooling sensation throughout the duration of the container's life because it's almost like it dies off. And so you have to factor that in because maybe I don't feel like it works as well when it doesn't give you that cooling sensation. So when I went through my first container, I had a small little bit of powder left over that I chose not to use because I felt like I wasn't getting the full benefit and effect of the powder. The Hourglass is, like I said, it's pretty expensive. But if you were deciding, if you're not a fan of the Becca and you don't like that cooling sensation or you're mad that the product kind of expires before you get through it, I would honestly say go for the Hourglass veil. It is even though it's more expensive. See, I want to be cheap. Inherently, I want to be cheap. But at the same time, you get what you pay for. And sometimes when you pay a little bit more, you get an incredibly amazing product. And so it is so finely milled. Hourglass is known for making beautiful powders. I love their ambient lighting powders. Their luminous bronzers are amazing. I have a couple of their blushes. Amazing. And their highlighters are actually phenomenal as well. So they know how to do powder. And I think, honestly, they know that too. And so they're charging for their work. And so unless you have very, very oily skin, I don't think this would work for you. And I would definitely at that point say go for the Laura Mercier. You get so much more product for a much more reasonable price by comparison. The Laura Mercier is a beautiful powder, also very finely milled. We don't want to wind up loading up heavy powder. And so the last thing I'm going to say about the Hourglass is that, actually, let me back up and talk about function right before I close out. Laura Mercier, definitely a setting powder. Becca, definitely a setting powder based on kind of what it, well, I don't want to say definitely because you could use it however you like, but that's how I choose to use them as setting powders. The Hourglass veil, interestingly enough, I could use as a setting powder or as a final finishing touch powder because it's got that little hint of luminosity, just ever so slight. I can't even tell you how slight it is, but it's just enough. So like after I do my foundation and I set my foundation, possibly even with the Hourglass, I set my foundation, I do bronzer, I do blush, I even do highlight because I don't like a very strong highlight. I would then go in and take a very fluffy brush. I can't really use this one because this one's powdered up, but I would use the Hourglass after I've done everything and just use it just as a complete buffer, just to kind of get everybody to blend in. And it winds up doing so without being 100% matte. And so I want to add that I think the Hourglass veil kind of has a multi-function because like I said, you could use it as a setting and you could use it also as a finishing powder. Currently I'm using by Laura Mercier not very luminous, a subtly luminous finishing powder, meaning I finish off my makeup and use it as the very last step. This is, what do they call this? This is the Candle Glow Sheer Perfecting Powder. So this has like a step more luminosity than the Hourglass veil, but this is what I've been using to kind of buff out just buff everybody out, make sure everybody's getting along and everybody's looking nicely blended. I believe you could use the Hourglass veil to do that as well. You know, now that I've kind of talked it out, I feel like I just made myself a list. Now that I've kind of talked it out with you guys, I think I like the Hourglass veil even more than I did when I sat down to talk about it. I actually talked to myself about whether or not I thought it was a good deal or not. Anyway, thank you so much for spending your time with me. Please let me know, one, what your favorite setting or finishing powders are, and two, let me know what you think about the powders that I talked about today, most especially the Hourglass veil. I'm so curious to know how you use it and what your thoughts on it are. As always, you can leave me a comment about anything. Like I said, if you are new, welcome. And if you've been with the G crew for a little while, then welcome back. I'm happy to see you. I would love it if you haven't already, if you would consider subscribing before you left. Or if you'd like to get to know me a little bit more, I definitely suggest you do hit the notification bell. I am such a tiny channel that I can almost guarantee YouTube is not going to let you know when I post something. So at least if you hit the notification bell, even if you're not a subscriber of mine, if you hit the bell, then at least you'll know when I put something up and we can get to know each other just a little bit more before you ultimately make up your mind. Other than that, thank you so much for spending your time with me. I hope you have a good rest of the day. I look forward to seeing you in my next video. In the meantime.